In the marble-lined corridors of the Wellington estate, a defiant heir was about to shatter generations of family expectations. What started as a formal engagement announcement took a shocking turn when they came face to face with their own conscience. Alexander Chen wasn't your typical trust fund beneficiary. For 24 years, they had spent their life navigating the ruthless politics of old money families. Known for their sharp wit and unwavering moral compass, when they encountered their stepfamily's ultimatum demanding marriage to secure a business merger, they had no idea they were walking into a choice that would define their entire future. Alexander's decision to pursue the brilliant but wheelchair-bound Victoria Ashworth instead would lead to a battle that threatened to destroy everything their family had built. What began as a desperate attempt to control an inheritance would become a revolution of the heart. The elite social circles of San Francisco would never be the same after one person chose love over legacy, dignity over dollars, and authentic connection over convenient arrangement. The stepfamily thought they held all the cards. They had no idea that the person they underestimated most would become the one who changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The elevator doors close with that familiar corporate whisper, and Tara Nguyen found herself trapped in a metal box with Evan Brandt, Senior VP of Growth, who somehow managed to fill the entire space. Despite being only one person out of two, he stepped closer than necessary, his cologne hitting her like a wall of synthetic confidence mixed with something predatory that made her stomach clench. "Morning, Tara," he said, voice warm honey over broken glass. "How's our data princess doing today?" She kept her eyes on the floor indicator, willing the numbers to change. Faster, our data princess, the phrase made her skin crawl, but she'd learned to swallow the discomfort like bitter medicine because fighting every microaggression was exhausting, and Evan Brandt was untouchable golden boy who brought in 8-figure deals and charmed board members at company retreats. "Fine," she said, keeping her voice level, just reviewing the privacy compliance metrics for Q4. Evan shifted closer, his shoulder brushing hers in the cramped space. "You know, Tara," he said, dropping his voice to something that felt inappropriately intimate, "I've been thinking about your work a lot lately. Very thorough, very detailed. The way you handle sensitive information is quite distracting." The word distracting hit her like a slap. She knew what he meant, and he knew she knew, but it was wrapped in enough ambiguity to make her question herself. Was she overreacting? Was this just corporate banter? Was she being too sensitive? The elevator dinged 7th floor, and she stepped out quickly. Without looking back at her desk tucked in the corner between the server room and the emergency exit that hadn't been tested since 2019, Tara opened a file she'd been maintaining for 3 months now, a simple spreadsheet hidden in her personal drive titled Project Tracking Metrics. But the metrics weren't about projects, they were about incidents. October 15th, elevator comment about being distracting, context unclear. Felt inappropriate. She typed the entry with steady fingers, her heartbeat still elevated from the elevator encounter. This wasn't the first time Evan had cornered her in small spaces, made comments that felt like they had double meanings. Stood too close during meetings when other people were around. He was careful, though. Always just ambiguous enough to maintain plausible deniability. Her Slack chimed urgent issue need to discuss the quarterly privacy audit. Can we meet in conference room C at 8 p.m. tonight? It's important. Tara stared at the message from Evan Brandt, sent at 6:47 p.m. on a Friday, when most people were already heading home. Conference room C was on the 8th floor in the executive wing, far from the security cameras that covered the main meeting areas. She'd been there once before for a similar urgent meeting that turned out to be anything but urgent. She grabbed her laptop and headed upstairs, heart hammering against her ribs. The 8th floor was eerily quiet after hours, just the hum of HVAC systems and the distant sound of a cleaning crew somewhere down the hall. Conference room C was dimly lit. Evan had turned off half the overhead lights, claiming they were too harsh for evening work. "Sorry to keep you late," he said, closing the door behind her. "But I wanted to discuss your career trajectory somewhere." Private career trajectory was corporate speak for something else entirely. Tara opened her laptop and pulled up the quarterly audit files ready to discuss. Actual work, but Evan didn't sit across from her at the conference table. He pulled his chair around to her side of the table, close enough that she could feel his body. Heat. You know, Tara, he said, leaning in slightly. You're incredibly talented, but you're also incredibly quiet. I worry that your potential is being wasted. In compliance, have you ever thought about moving into a more client-facing role? She kept her eyes on her screen typing notes even though her hands were shaking slightly. I'm comfortable in my current position, Evan. The privacy work is important, and I'm good at it. He laughed low and warm, but there was something sharp underneath. Oh, you're definitely good at it. Very good at handling confidential information. It's very trustworthy, but sometimes I wonder if you're almost too careful too. Cautious, you know what I mean? No, she said, simply still typing because she refused to look at him, because looking at him would mean acknowledging that this conversation was happening the way it was happening. Evan reached over and gently closed her laptop, his fingers brushing hers in the process. Look at me, Tara, he said softly. She looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time since entering the room. His expression was unreadable. Somewhere between concern and something else, something that made her want to run. I think you have incredible potential, he continued, but potential needs to be nurtured and developed. You need someone who can guide you, help you navigate the complexities of corporate advancement, someone who understands your unique strengths. The word unique felt loaded with meaning. She didn't want to unpack. Tara reopened her laptop and began packing her things. The audit looks fine, Evan. I'll send you the final report Monday morning. She stood to leave, but he stood too, blocking her path to the door, not aggressively, just casually, but the effect was the same. Tara, he said, putting a hand on her shoulder, let me know if you ever want to discuss your future here. I'm always available for one-on-one mentoring. She nodded quickly, ducked under his arm, and fled back at her desk. At 9:15 p.m. she opened her hidden spreadsheet and added another line, October 22nd, called Too Late. Meeting in conference room, see dimmed lights. Discussion of mentoring and career advancement felt inappropriate. Physical contact, hand on shoulder, exit block. She saved the file, backed it up to her personal drive, and began forwarding key emails to her personal account, just in case. Across the floor, Dante Rivera was still at his desk debugging code for the mobile app. He looked up as she passed, working late. Again, he said quietly, you okay? She paused. Something in his voice made her think he already knew the answer. I'm fine. Just catching up on some compliance stuff, Dante nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't buying it. If you ever need someone to cover for you in meetings or anything, he said, returning to his screen, just let me know. Tara felt something loosen in her chest for the first time in weeks. Someone had offered help without expecting anything in return. Someone had noticed she wasn't okay. Thanks, Dante. She said and meant it. The knock on Chloe Delaney's office door came at 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, when the hour director was between meetings and Tara had finally worked up the courage to do what she'd been avoiding for weeks. She carried a manila folder containing printed screenshots, timestamps, and a timeline that read like a horror story disguised as corporate mentorship. Come in, Chloe called from behind her massive desk that was positioned to make visitors feel small and exposed. Tara entered, clutching her folder like a shield. Hi, Chloe. I was hoping we could discuss a workplace issue I've been experiencing. Chloe looked up from her computer with practiced concern, the kind of expression that was warm enough to encourage disclosure, but detached enough to maintain professional boundaries. Of course, Tara. Please sit down. What's on your mind? Tara took the chair across from Chloe's desk and placed her folder on the surface. Between them, I've been documenting some interactions with Evan Brandt that make me uncomfortable. They feel inappropriate, and I'm not sure how to handle them. Chloe leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. Her expression shifted subtly from concern to something that looked almost like irritation. Evan Brandt, she repeated as if testing the words. Our senior VP of growth. Yes, Tara said, opening her folder and sliding the timeline across the desk. These are the incidents I've documented over the past few months. The pattern seems to be escalating. Chloe glanced at the papers without really reading them, her eyes skimming the surface like she was looking at a grocery list rather than a formal complaint. Tara, she said after a long pause, I want you to know that I take all workplace concerns seriously. But I also want to make sure we're interpreting interactions correctly. Interpreting interactions. Correctly, the phrase hit Tara like a bucket of cold water. Evan is one of our most respected executives, Chloe continued. He's brought tremendous value to this company, and he's known for being particularly supportive of junior staff members, especially women. He's mentored dozens of employees over the years. Tara felt her face flush. Mentored. She repeated, "Yes," Chloe said, picking up the timeline and scanning it more carefully now. "I'm looking at these incidents and I have to ask, are you sure you're not perhaps misreading corporate culture? Evan is naturally charismatic, and he does tend to be very hands-on with promising employees." Hands-on. Tara's voice came out sharper than she intended. Chloe set the papers down and leaned forward with an expression that was supposed to be maternal but felt condescending. "Tara, I understand that you're relatively new to this level of corporate environment, and sometimes what feels uncomfortable is actually just the normal mentoring process. Senior executives invest in high-potential employees, and that investment can feel intense." Tara stared at Chloe, trying to process what she was hearing. "You're saying that late-night meetings and dimmed conference rooms are normal mentoring?" Chloe sighed, as if Tara was being deliberately difficult. "I'm saying that successful executives often work unconventional hours, and they meet with team members when their schedules allow. As for the conference room lighting, Evan has mentioned before that he finds the standard overhead lighting too harsh for evening work. It's actually quite common." Tara felt like she was drowning in corporate speak. Every specific detail she documented was being reframed as normal, even beneficial to her career development. "What about the comments about my appearance, the way he stands too close?" The hand on my shoulder. Chloe's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Tara, I'm going to be very direct with you because I think you need to hear this. These complaints could be considered frivolous. They could damage your reputation here, and frankly, they could be seen as an attempt to gain leverage or attention." Frivolous, the word hit Tara like a physical blow. "Yes." Chloe continued. "Frivolous. Evan Brandt has an impeccable track record. He's never had a complaint of this nature, and he's worked with dozens of female employees without incident. I'm concerned that you might be misinterpreting his mentorship as something inappropriate." Tara gathered her papers with shaking hands. "I documented everything." Chloe time-stomped screenshots. "Call logs." Chloe stood up, signaling the end of the meeting, which brings me to another concern. Tara creating extensive documentation about normal workplace interactions could be seen as paranoid behavior, or even as preparation for false accusations, both of which would be very concerning from an our perspective. Tara stood, clutching her folder against her chest. "So, you're saying that documenting inappropriate behavior is itself inappropriate?" "Saying," Chloe said, moving toward the door, "that you might want to consider focusing on your actual job responsibilities rather than analyzing every interaction with senior leadership. My advice is to drop this misunderstanding and concentrate on being a team player." Tara left Chloe's office, feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. Every instinct she'd developed over months of uncomfortable interactions was being dismissed as paranoia, or worse, as manipulation. She walked back to her desk in a haze, barely registering the familiar sounds of the office. That afternoon, strange things began happening. Her access to the shared drive for the Eastern Corridor project was revoked. Without explanation, her invitation to the weekly compliance meeting disappeared from her calendar. When she asked Dante about it, he looked confused. "I thought you were pulled off that project," he said. "I wasn't," Tara replied, but even as she said it, she wondered if that was still true by Friday. Her annual performance review meeting had been postponed indefinitely, and she noticed a new entry in her employee file visible when she logged into HR portal. "Employee demonstrates difficulty integrating with team dynamics. Recommend additional coaching on collaborative communication." She screenshotted the entry and added it to her folder. That evening, alone in her apartment, Tara opened her laptop and began transferring everything to her personal drive. Every email, every screenshot, every timestamp, every piece of evidence that proved she wasn't imagining things, wasn't being frivolous, wasn't paranoid. She was being systematically erased, and she finally understood that hour wasn't there to protect her. It was there to protect the company from her. 3 a.m. was becoming Tara's most productive time of day, when the office building was empty except for security guards and the distant hum of servers. She'd started staying late not because she had more work, but because she needed uninterrupted time to build her case against a system that was actively trying to erase her. Her desk had become a war room laptop open to multiple screen spreadsheets full of metadata timestamps, cross-referenced with calendar entries and a growing collection of screenshots that told a story Chloe Delaney and Evan Brandt clearly didn't want told. She'd learned to think like a forensic accountant. Every digital interaction of traces, and Tara was methodically following the paper trail that proved her experience wasn't just in her head. October 30th, she typed into her master timeline, discovered employee, file notation difficulty, integrating with team dynamics, dated October 25th, 3 days after meeting with our no prior notation of performance issues. She pulled up her previous performance reviews, glowing consistently above average ratings for collaboration and teamwork until this month, and suddenly she was marked as having integration difficulties. The change was so abrupt it was almost comical, except it wasn't funny. Because Tara could see the strategy now: create a paper trail that justified whatever action they were planning to take against her, make her look like a problem employee. Couldn't handle feedback, who was paranoid, who was difficult. She opened her Outlook calendar and began documenting the changes that had appeared over the past 2 weeks. The compliance meeting she'd attended monthly for 8 months was now marked as manager. Approval required. Her access to the client database had been downgraded from full access to view. Only her name had been removed from the Eastern Corridor project distribution list. Every change was small, defensible, explainable, but together they painted a picture of someone being quietly pushed out. Tara opened a new spreadsheet and began mapping the timeline access changes overlaid with her interactions with Evan and Chloe. The pattern was clear. Retaliation disguised as performance management. She was so focused on her analysis that she didn't notice Dante approaching until he cleared his throat softly. "Hey, Tara, still here?" She looked up, startled. "It's almost midnight. What are you doing here?" "Debugging the mobile payment system," Dante said, but he wasn't looking at her computer screen. He was looking at her with an expression that was part concern, part recognition. "You've been staying late a lot lately," Tara minimized her spreadsheets, "just catching up on some compliance work." Dante pulled up a chair and sat down next to her desk. "Tara," he said quietly, "I know we don't talk much, but I want you to know that I see what's happening." Her heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said carefully, "that some of us notice when someone's getting pushed out. We notice when meeting invites disappear, and when access gets revoked, and when Our starts asking questions about specific employees." Tara felt tears prick her eyes. Someone else had noticed. She wasn't imagining it. Dante continued, speaking in a voice so low she had to lean in to hear him. "I also notice when senior executives start acting differently around certain people. They make comments that aren't appropriate, when they corner people in empty conference rooms." Tara's breath caught. "You saw I work late a lot," Dante said, "and the 8th floor conference rooms have glass walls. Evan Brandt isn't as subtle as he thinks he is." For the first time in weeks, Tara felt like she could breathe properly. Someone believed her. Someone had witnessed what she'd been experiencing. "What you're doing," Dante said, nodding toward her laptop, "documenting everything. It's smart. Keep doing it." "Why haven't you said anything?" Tara asked. "Because," Dante said honestly, "I'm a first-generation college graduate on a visa, and I need this job. But that doesn't mean I can't help you keep records, keep evidence. And if you need someone to verify what they've seen, I'll do it." Tara felt a surge of gratitude, mixed with guilt that Dante was risking his own position to validate her experience. That night, after Dante left, Tara returned to her documentation with renewed focus. She pulled up the Slack thread where she'd asked Evan about the privacy audit timeline, the one where he'd made a comment about her attention to detail being distracting. The thread was gone. She checked her message history with Evan scrolling back through weeks of conversations. The entire thread had been deleted, not just from her side, but from the system. Entirely, she could see the gap where it should have been. Like a missing tooth in a smile, Tara opened her personal email and began forwarding everything: screenshots of deleted conversations, backup copies of her documentation emails to herself, with detailed summaries of conversations that had no digital trail. She'd learned that in corporate America, if something wasn't documented, it didn't happen, so she was going to document everything by dawn. She'd created a comprehensive archive of her experience, complete with timestamps, metadata, and cross-referenced Evidence that painted a picture of systematic harassment and retaliation. She backed up the archive to 3 different cloud services and emailed herself copies from her personal account at 6 a.m. She finally allowed herself to go home, but not before printing out the most damning evidence and sealing it in an envelope that she locked in her desk drawer. If they wanted to erase her, they'd have to work a lot harder than deleting a few Slack messages across the office building. Dante Rivera sat at his desk, staring at a flash drive he'd been carrying in his pocket for 3 days. He'd made a copy of Tara's documentation the night he'd found her working late because he'd recognized the look on her face. He'd seen it before in his sister's eyes when she'd tried to report her supervisor for harassment only to be told she was being too sensitive. Dante had watched his sister leave her job because no one would believe her, and he'd sworn he wouldn't let it happen again. He looked at the flash drive and thought about Maya Hassan, the mid-level legal counsel who'd helped him with his visa paperwork, the woman who'd asked careful questions about workplace culture during their meetings. Maya Hassan, who'd mentioned that she was always available if employees had concerns about legal compliance. Dante picked up his phone and typed a careful message to Maya, asking if she had time to discuss a potential compliance issue. Then he put the flash drive in his pocket and walked to the elevator. It was time to stop being silent. Maya Hassan received the anonymous email at 7:42 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. While she was drinking her second cup of coffee and reviewing contract amendments for the quarterly board meeting, the subject line read, "Urgent compliance matter requires legal review," and the sender was listed as concerned employee. She almost deleted it. Corporate legal got dozens of anonymous tips every month, most of them disgruntled employees complaining about parking policies or cafeteria prices, but something about the tone of this one made her pause. The email was brief, professional, and specific. "Ms. Hassan, I believe there is a pattern of harassment and retaliation occurring in our company that creates significant legal liability. The attached documentation was compiled by an employee who reported harassment to our and is now experiencing systematic retaliation. I believe this falls under your purview. As legal counsel, please review the attached files confidentially." Maya opened the first attachment and felt her stomach drop. It was a meticulously organized spreadsheet with tabs labeled incidents, timeline access changes, and evidence. Each entry was time-stamped, cross-referenced, and supported by screenshots. The level of detail was staggering. She opened the Incidents tab and began reading. October 15th elevator comment about being distracting. October 22nd late meeting, dimmed lights. Inappropriate physical contact. November 3rd invitation. 2 off-site dinner declined. November 8th. Access to Eastern Corridor project revoked. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The pattern jumped out at her, immediately escalating inappropriate behavior followed by swift retaliation. The documentation was so thorough it read like a legal brief. Maya had been practicing corporate law for 8 years, and she'd seen plenty of harassment complaints. Most of them were he said, she said situations with murky timelines and conflicting accounts. But this was different. This was evidence. She opened her calendar and blocked out the rest of the morning. Then she walked down the hall to Jennifer Park's office. Jennifer was the senior associate who handled employment law and had a reputation for being unflappable. "Jen," she said, closing the door behind her, "I need you to look at something confidentially." Jennifer looked up from her computer. "What's going on?" Maya forwarded the email and attachments to Jennifer's secure account. "Take a look at this and tell me what you think." Jennifer spent 20 minutes reviewing the files, her expression growing more serious with each page. "Maya," she said finally, "this is a textbook case of quid pro quo harassment followed by retaliation. Whoever compiled this documentation knows exactly what they're doing. Do you recognize the executive mentioned in the complaints?" Maya asked. "Evan Brandt," Jennifer said grimly. "Oh, I know Evan Brandt." Maya felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" Jennifer lowered her voice. "I mean, he has a reputation among the women in this company. Nothing official, nothing that's ever been reported, but there are whispers about late-night meetings, about inappropriate comments about women who suddenly find themselves pushed out after rejecting his advances." Maya stared at her. Why hasn't anyone reported it officially? Because Jennifer said they've seen what happens when women complain about senior executives. They get labeled as difficult or paranoid, or they get managed out through performance reviews. I've heard at least 3 women mention Evan Brandt in off-the-record conversations. Over the past 2 years, Maya felt a chill run down her spine, and HR has never flagged this. Jennifer laughed bitterly. Chloe Delaney's job is to protect the company from liability, not to protect employees from executives. She's very good at making problems disappear quietly. Maya returned to her office and began a deeper dive into the documentation. The anonymous tipster had included metadata that told its own story. Deleted Slack messages, calendar entries that had been removed, access permissions that had been downgraded. She pulled up the company's internal directory and cross-referenced the timestamps with other employees' schedules. The late-night meeting in conference room C had occurred when the 8th floor was nearly empty. The elevator incident had happened during the morning rush, when no one would have noticed. Whoever had compiled this evidence understood that harassment thrives in isolation, and they documented not just the incidents, but the context that made them possible. Maya opened a new case file in the legal database and began entering the preliminary information. Then she stopped. Should she be doing this? The email had been anonymous. There was no official complaint, no employee asking for legal intervention. But there was also a pattern of behavior that created significant liability for the company, and that definitely fell under her purview. She picked up her phone and dialed Isaac Morel's extension. Isaac, it's Maya Hassan. In legal, do you have a few minutes to discuss a potential compliance issue? 30 minutes later, Maya sat across from Isaac Morel in his corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the San Francisco Bay. Isaac was the kind of executive corporate restructures by being aggressively neutral. He never took sides, he never made waves, and he never let personal feelings interfere with business decisions. What's this about, Maya? Isaac asked, settling behind his desk with a cup of green tea. Maya opened her laptop and pulled up the documentation. Isaac, we've received information about potential harassment and retaliation involving a senior executive. I think we need to investigate. Isaac's expression didn't change. Which executive? Evan Brandt, Maya said, watching Isaac's face carefully. Isaac was quiet for a long moment, then he sighed. What kind of information? Maya walked him through the key points: the pattern of escalating behavior, the meticulous documentation, the systematic retaliation. Isaac listened without interrupting, his expression growing more grim with each detail. This is well documented, Isaac said finally. Who's the complainant? That's the issue, Maya replied. The information came to us anonymously, but based on the access logs and calendar entries, I believe I can identify the employee. Isaac leaned back in his chair. Maya, I want you to understand something. Evan Brandt brought in $42 million in new business last quarter, is on track to make partner, and he's being considered for the executive committee. Maya felt her stomach clench. Are you telling me not to investigate? I'm telling you, Isaac said, to be very careful about how you proceed. False accusations against senior executives can destroy careers on both sides. Maya chose her words carefully. Isaac, this documentation suggests a pattern of behavior that could expose the company to significant legal liability. If we don't address it, we could be looking at EOC complaints, federal investigations, and civil lawsuits. Isaac was quiet for another long moment, then he nodded discreetly. Investigate, but keep it quiet. No formal proceedings until we understand the scope. Maya left Isaac's office with authorization to dig deeper, but also with a clear understanding that her investigation would be watched closely by people who had a vested interest in making the problem disappear. Back at her desk, she opened the anonymous email again and began drafting a response to concerned employee. Your information has been received and is being reviewed confidentially. If you or the affected employee would like to speak with legal counsel directly, please contact this office. We take these matters seriously. She hesitated before hitting send. Once she replied to this email, she was officially involved. There would be no plausible deniability, no way to claim ignorance if the investigation went sideways, but there would also be no way to claim ignorance if the behavior continued and escalated into something worse. Maya Hit send across the building. Tara Nguyen was sitting in another late-night meeting with Chloe Delaney, this time in HR's main conference room, with recording equipment visible on the table. Chloe said, settling into her chair with a legal pad and pen. I wanted to follow up on our conversation from last week. I've been thinking about your concerns, and I want to make sure we address them appropriately. Tara noticed that Chloe had said concerns, not complaints. The word choice felt deliberate. I've also been doing some research. Chloe continued into best practices for employee mentoring, and I think there might be some communication strategies that could help you navigate senior-level relationships more effectively. Communication strategies. Tara repeated, yes, Chloe said, scribbling notes on her legal pad. Sometimes junior employees misinterpret senior executive communication styles, especially when those executives are direct or demanding. Successful people often communicate differently, and it can take time to adjust. Tara felt the familiar sensation of reality shifting around her. Everything she'd experienced was being reframed as a communication problem. Her fault for not understanding Evan's style. Chloe continued, I'm also concerned about some feedback I've received regarding your collaboration with team members. There seems to be a perception that you've become somewhat withdrawn or defensive. What team members? Tara asked. I can't share specifics, Chloe said, but the feedback suggests that you might benefit from some coaching on interpersonal communication, perhaps some training on working effectively with senior leadership. Tara realized she was being recorded, being set up for termination based on manufactured performance issues. I think that's a great idea, Tara said, forcing her voice to remain calm. Could you send me the specifics of this feedback in writing so I can address the concerns directly? Chloe's pen stopped moving. I'm not sure that would be appropriate, Tara. This kind of feedback is usually handled verbally in coaching conversations. Tara smiled politely. I'd just like to make sure I understand the concerns correctly. Written feedback helps me track my improvement. Chloe's expression tightened slightly. We'll see if that's necessary, Tara. Let's focus on moving forward constructively. Tara left the meeting knowing she'd been recorded, saying she welcomed coaching and training. The recording would be used to justify whatever action they took next. In her car in the parking garage, she turned on her phone's voice memo app and began speaking. November 15th, 6:30 p.m. Meeting with Chloe Delaney. Recorded conversation where she suggested I needed communication training. Framed harassment as misunderstanding of executive communication style. Mentioned unnamed feedback about my collaboration, but refused to provide written documentation. She paused, then continued, I believe this is preparation for termination based on manufactured performance issues. Recommend immediate escalation to external authorities. Tara had stopped believing the system would protect her. Now she was building a case to protect herself. The Slack message appeared in Tara's notifications at 11:23 a.m. on a Friday, and for a moment she thought she was hallucinating. Someone had created a private channel called Justice Served and invited half the company. The only message was a link to a TechCrunch article with the headline, Fintech Giant Delmar faces federal investigation over harassment cover-up. Tara clicked the link with shaking hands and saw her story reflected back at her through the lens of investigative journalism. The article didn't name her, but it didn't need to. Anyone who worked at Del Mar would recognize the details. It's the timeline, the carefully documented evidence, the systematic retaliation according to sources. Familiar with the investigation, the article read a senior data analyst compiled months of evidence, documenting inappropriate behavior from a senior executive and subsequent retaliation. After reporting the incidents to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has opened a formal inquiry into the company's handling of workplace misconduct. Complaints. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dante. Holy shit, Tara, did you know this was coming out? She'd spoken to Agent Lara Connors twice. Given her deposition, provided all her documentation, but no one had mentioned media attention. The EOK investigation was supposed to be confidential across the office. She could see clusters of employees huddled around computer screens, voices hushed but animated. The story was spreading through the building like wildfire, and Tara could feel the weight of 100 conversations. She wasn't part of. Her computer chimed with an urgent message from Isaac Morrill. All hands. Meeting conference room A. Immediately Tara gathered her laptop and headed to the main conference room, which was packed with employees standing against the walls. Isaac stood at the front looking. Like a man who'd aged 5 years and 5 hours beside him stood a woman, Tara. Didn't recognize wearing a crisp navy suit and an expression that suggested she ate. "Corporate crises for breakfast, everyone," Isaac began, his voice strained. "I want to address the article that appeared this morning about our company first. Let me introduce Sarah Chen from Morrison & Associates, our external crisis management firm." Sarah stepped forward with a smile that was all teeth, no warmth. "Team," she said. "We're here to help navigate this unfortunate situation. The allegations mentioned in the article are currently under investigation, and we can't comment on specifics. But I want to assure everyone that Delmar takes workplace safety seriously. Unfortunate situation." Tara felt her face flush. The systematic harassment and retaliation she'd endured was being reframed as a PR problem. "We ask that everyone refrain from speaking to media outlets." Sarah continued. "Any inquiries should be directed to our communications team. We also want to remind everyone of our confidentiality policies. Regarding internal matters," Tara looked around the room at her colleagues. Faces, some looked uncomfortable, others looked angry. A few were staring directly at her with expressions she couldn't read. After the meeting, Tara returned to her desk to find her computer access had been suspended and a note requesting she report to HR immediately. She walked to Chloe Delaney's office with a sense of inevitability. Chloe wasn't alone this time. She was flanked by Sarah, Chen, and a man Tara didn't recognize who introduced himself as David Kim from Legal Tara. Chloe said without preamble, "We need to discuss your role in this morning's media coverage." "I didn't speak to any reporters," Tara said, taking the single chair facing the panel. David Kim leaned forward. "But you did provide information to federal investigators that has now been leaked to the press, creating significant reputational damage for the company." Tara felt her temper flare. "I provided truthful information in response to a legal investigation. That's not the same as leaking to the press." Sarah Chen consulted her tablet. "Tara, we understand this has been a stressful situation for everyone involved. We want to find a path forward that works for all parties." "All parties," Tara repeated. "Yes," Sarah said. "We're prepared to offer you a generous severance package. 6 months' salary plus benefits and assistance with job placement in exchange. You would sign a non-disclosure agreement and agree not to pursue any further legal action." Tara looked at the three faces staring at her expectantly. They wanted to buy her silence, pay her to disappear, pretend none of this had happened. "What about the investigation?" Tara asked. David Kim cleared his throat. "The EOC investigation will proceed regardless of your employment status. Our offer is simply about helping you transition to your next opportunity." Tara stood up. "I need time to consider your offer, of course," Sarah said, "but we would need a response." By Monday morning, Tara left the meeting knowing she wouldn't be coming back on Monday. Not by choice, anyway. They'd made it clear that her options were take the money and disappear, or be terminated for cause, based on manufactured performance issues. In the parking garage, she called Reena Patel, her former manager who'd left Delmar 6 months earlier for a position at a smaller tech company. "Reena, it's Tara Nguyen. Can we talk?" Reena's voice was warm but concerned. "Tara, what's going on?" "I saw the article this morning." Tara gave her a quick summary of the situation, ending with the severance offer she'd just received. "Don't take it, Reena," said immediately Tara. "They're scared, which means you have leverage. They wouldn't be offering 6 months salary if they weren't terrified of what might come out in a full investigation." "But what if I can't find another job?" Tara asked. "What if they blacklist me?" Reena was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Tara, I left Delmar because of the same toxic culture you're fighting. I never reported it, never documented it, and I've regretted it every day since you did what I couldn't do." "You spoke up that evening." Tara sat in her apartment, reviewing job postings when her phone rang. Unknown number. "This is Tara." "Ms. Nguyen, this is Melissa Torres from the San Francisco Chronicle. I was hoping we could discuss the allegations mentioned in today's TechCrunch article." Tara hung up immediately, then turned off her phone, but the calls kept coming. Reporters from tech blogs, mainstream newspapers, business magazines, everyone wanted to talk to the woman who'd brought down Delmar's Golden Boy, except Evan Brandt hadn't been brought down yet. According to the latest internal email, he was on administrative leave, pending the investigation, which in corporate speak meant paid vacation until the crisis blew over. Tara opened her laptop and began researching the reporters who'd called her. She found Melissa Torres's Previous articles about tech industry misconduct. Sarah Kim from Wired Hood broken the story about sexual harassment at venture capital firms. Alex Chen from the Wall Street Journal, who specialized in corporate fraud investigations. These weren't gossip bloggers looking for clicks. These were serious journalists who understood the difference between accusations and evidence. Tara picked up her phone and dialed Melissa Torres. Ms. Torres. This is Tara Nguyen. Returning your call. The article ran on a Sunday morning when most of Delmore's executives were at home with their families trying to enjoy their weekend. The headline stretched across the top of the San Francisco Chronicle's business section: Silicon Valley's silent crisis, how one woman's meticulous records exposed a culture of harassment and retaliation. Tara Nguyen's name appeared in print for the first time, not as an anonymous source or unnamed complainant, but as herself, a data privacy analyst who'd refused to be silenced. The article included excerpts from her documentation, timeline analysis, and expert commentary on the legal implications of systematic retaliation. But the Chronicle hadn't stopped with Tara's story. Melissa Torres had spent weeks investigating Delmar's culture, talking to current and former employees who'd witnessed or experienced similar treatment. The article revealed a pattern that went far beyond Evan Brandt, according to interviews with 12 current and former employees. The article stated Delmar Industries has a history of dismissing harassment complaints and retaliating against women who speak up. Former employee Jessica Rodriguez left the company after reporting inappropriate behavior from her supervisor and receiving a performance improvement plan. 2 weeks later, former employee Rachel Kim described a culture where women who rejected advances from senior executives found themselves reassigned to less visible projects with reduced responsibilities. The article included expert analysis from employment lawyers who described Delmar's response as textbook retaliation designed to discourage other victims from coming forward. By Monday morning, the story had been picked up by TechCrunch, Business Insider, and the Wall Street Journal. Delmar's stock price dropped 8% in pre-market trading, and 3 major clients had requested meetings to discuss their contracts. Tara arrived at the office to find a media circus outside the building. Reporters with cameras waited near the entrance, while photographers captured employees hurrying past with their heads down. Inside the building, the atmosphere was electric, nervous energy crackling through every conversation. Cluster of employees whispered in corners while executives huddled in glass-walled conference rooms with phones pressed to their ears. Tara's desk had been cleaned out, her personal items packed in a cardboard box with a note directing her to report to her immediately. But when she arrived at Chloe Delaney's office, she found it empty. Ms. Nguyen, a security guard, approached her. Ms. Delaney is no longer with the company. Mr. Morrill would like to see you in his office. Isaac Morrell's corner office had been transformed into a war room. Legal documents covered his conference table, while 2 people Tara didn't recognize worked frantically on laptops. She recognized Sarah Chen from Crisis Management, but the other faces were new. Tara, Isaac said, standing when she entered. Thank you for coming. Please sit down. The tone was different. Gone was the corporate coldness, replaced by something that felt almost like desperation. Tara, Isaac continued. We've had a chance to review the media coverage, and we want to discuss how we can move forward constructively. Constructively, Tara repeated. Yes, Isaac said. We recognize that there have been failures in our process, and we want to make this right. One of the lawyers looked up from his laptop. Mr. Morrill, we've discussed the parameters. Isaac nodded. Right, Tara. We're prepared to offer you a significant settlement. A 2-year salary plus benefits, a positive reference letter, and our commitment to implementing comprehensive anti-harassment training company-wide in exchange for what Tara asked your agreement not to pursue further legal action, the lawyer said, and your cooperation in helping us rebuild our workplace culture. Tara almost laughed. They wanted her to help fix the culture that had tried to destroy her. What about Evan Brandt? She asked. Isaac shifted uncomfortably. Evan is no longer with the company. As of this morning, Tara felt a surge of satisfaction, followed immediately by suspicion. And Chloe Delaney also no longer with the company, Isaac said. We're conducting a comprehensive review of our HR policies and leadership. Tara looked around the room at the faces staring at her. Expectantly, they were offering her more money than she'd make in 2 years, plus the chance to be part of rebuilding the company. But she'd learned not to trust Delmar's promises. "I need to review any offer with my attorney," Tara said. Of course, Isaac said, "But Tara, I want you to know that we genuinely want to make this right. You showed tremendous courage in speaking up, and we respect that courage." Tara thought it hadn't felt like courage. It had felt like survival that afternoon. She met with the employment lawyer Rena had recommended, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Wong, who specialized in workplace discrimination cases. "They're scared," Patricia said after reviewing Delmar's offer. "The Ioki investigation is just getting started, and now they have media attention. They're trying to control the narrative by settling with you quickly. Should I take it, Tara?" asked Patricia, leaned back in her chair. "That depends on what you want, Tara. Do you want money, or do you want change?" "Can't I have both?" Patricia smiled. "Maybe. But settlements come with NDAs, which means you can't talk about what happened. You become part of the silence." Again that evening, Tara sat in her apartment reading the comments on the Chronicle article. Hundreds of women had shared their own stories of harassment and retaliation, creating a thread of support and validation she'd never expected. One comment stopped her cold. "Thank you for speaking up. You gave me the courage to file my own EO complaint." "I thought I was alone." Tara realized that taking Delmar's money and signing their NDA wouldn't just silence her, it would silence all the women who saw her as proof that speaking up was possible. She picked up her phone and called Patricia Wong. "Patricia, it's Tara. I've made my decision. I'm not taking the settlement." "Are you sure?" Patricia asked. "This is a lot of money, I'm sure," Tara said. "If I take their money and sign their NDA, then the next woman who gets harassed at Delmar will be alone." "Again, I can't do that." Patricia was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Tara, I think you're about to change everything. 6 months later, Tara Nguyen stood at a podium in front of 300 people at the annual Women in Tech conference in San Francisco. The conference organizers had invited her to speak about workplace advocacy and documentation strategies, but she'd insisted on a different title: "Building Systems That Can't Ignore You." The audience was a mix of software engineers, data scientists, product managers, and executives, women who worked in companies across Silicon Valley, women who understood exactly what she'd been through. "When I started documenting my harassment," Tara said, looking out at the sea of faces, "I wasn't planning to become a whistleblower. I was just trying to protect myself. I was trying to create a record that proved I wasn't imagining things." She clicked to her first slide, a screenshot of her original spreadsheet project tracking metrics, the innocent-looking file that had brought down 2 executives and forced a company to confront its toxic culture. "The thing about harassment," Tara continued, "is that it's designed to make you question your own experience. It happens in isolation. It's always ambiguous. It leaves you wondering if you're being too sensitive or misinterpreting. Corporate culture." Murmurs of recognition rippled through the audience. "But data doesn't lie," she said, clicking to the next slide timeline. "Analysis, metadata, call logs, screenshots. If you document everything systematically, you create a record that can't be dismissed as frivolous or paranoid." After her presentation, Tara was surrounded by women asking questions, sharing their own stories, requesting copies of her documentation templates. She'd created a website called documenteverything.org that provided free resources for employees facing harassment. Ms. Nguyen, a young woman, approached her clutching a notebook. "I work at a startup, and my KTO has been making inappropriate comments. I've been keeping notes, but I wasn't sure how to organize them." Tara spent 20 minutes walking her through the documentation process, emphasizing the importance of timestamps, metadata, and backing up everything to personal accounts. That evening, Tara met Maya Hassan for dinner at a small restaurant in the Mission District. Maya had left Delmar 3 months earlier to start her own employment law practice specializing in workplace discrimination cases. "How does it feel?" Maya asked to be the keynote speaker at Women in Tech conferences. "Surreal," Tara admitted a year ago. "I was hiding in the corner of the 7th floor, trying to be invisible. Now everyone wants to hear my story." Maya raised her wine glass to being visible, to speaking up, to changing everything. They clinked glasses, and Tara felt a sense of completion. She'd survived the gaslighting, the retaliation, the attempts to erase her, and somehow she'd come out stronger. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dante, who was now working at a nonprofit focused on tech industry accountability. The EOCE has just announced their final ruling on Delmar 2. $3 million fine, mandatory. Training and an independent monitor for the next 2 years, Tara showed Maya. The message who grinned, that's what real accountability looks like, but the best part, Tara said, wasn't the money or the headlines, or even the satisfaction of watching Evan Brandt's LinkedIn profile disappear. The best part was the emails she received daily from women who'd found the courage to document their own experiences, to report harassment, to refuse settlements that came with NDAs. A few weeks later, Tara started her new job as Director of Workplace Equity at a mid-sized tech company run by a woman CEO who'd recruited her specifically to build anti-harassment systems from the ground up. Her office had windows that overlooked the bay and a door she could close when she needed to focus on the steady stream of employees who came to her with concerns, complaints, and questions. But the most important thing in her office was a framed copy of her original documentation spreadsheet. The one that had started everything, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon against systematic oppression was simply refusing to let them erase you. On her desk, she kept a stack of business cards with her name, title, and a simple message underneath: if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Document everything, because Tara Nguyen had learned that in corporate America, the truth was only as powerful as the evidence that supported it, and she was determined to make sure no other woman would have to fight that battle alone. And when the phone rang with another anonymous tip about harassment at another company, Tara Nguyen answered on the first ring, because the fire she'd lit was spreading and there was still so much work to do. The federal subpoena arrived on a Tuesday morning, 18 months after Tara thought her Del Mar chapter had closed forever. She was reviewing quarterly compliance reports at her new company when her assistant knocked on her office door with an expression that suggested the envelope she carried contained something significant. Tara Nguyen, the process server, had said, "This is for you." The subpoena was thick, official, and bore the seal of the United States District Court for the Northern District of California, case number CV 243847. United States of America versus Del Mar Industries Incorporated and related defendants. Tara's name appeared on page 3 as a key witness in a federal fraud investigation. Read the document twice, her coffee growing cold as she processed the implications. The government wasn't just investigating workplace harassment anymore. They were investigating securities, fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice charges that carried prison time, not corporate fines. Her phone rang. Patricia Wang, employment attorney. "Patricia," Tara said. "Have you seen?" "I've seen," Patricia replied, "and we need to talk immediately. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" Tara cleared her calendar and drove across the city to Patricia's law firm, wondering how a harassment case had morphed into a federal criminal investigation. The answer, she discovered, was hidden in the metadata. Patricia spread documents across her conference table like a detective laying out evidence. "Tara," she said, "the EOC investigation into Del Mar opened doors that nobody expected. When federal investigators started reviewing the company's internal communications, they found something interesting." "What kind of something?" Tara asked. "The kind that suggests Del Mar's executives were deliberately hiding financial irregularities behind a culture of silence." Patricia pulled up an email thread on her laptop. "Look at this." Tara leaned forward and read an exchange between Isaac Morrill and the company's chief financial officer, dated 6 months before her harassment complaint. The subject line was Q3 projections adjustment. "Isaac, we need to discuss the Eastern Corridor contract revenue recognition. There are some timing issues that require careful handling. CFO understood. Will ensure compliance team doesn't flag anything unusual." Patricia scrolled down to show more messages. The Eastern Corridor contract, the same one that had collapsed spectacularly after Evan Brandt's reckless routing decisions had been used to inflate Del Mar's quarterly revenue projections. When the contract failed, the company had quietly moved the losses to the following quarter while maintaining public projections that assumed the contract remained profitable. They were cooking the books. Tara said, "More than that," Patricia replied. "They were using harassment and retaliation to silence anyone who might expose the financial irregularities. Your documentation of the dub Eastern Corridor routing disaster didn't just prove Evan Brandt was incompetent. It proved the company knew the contract was failing while publicly claiming it was successful." Tara felt a chill run down her spine. "You're saying they tried to destroy My career to cover up securities fraud. Patricia nodded. When you documented the routing changes and timeline discrepancies, you accidentally created evidence of financial fraud. The harassment was real, but it was also convenient. It gave them a reason to discredit you before you could expose their accounting irregularities. The federal investigators, Patricia continued, had connected dozens of dots. Tara's meticulous documentation had provided the foundation, but they'd built on it with forensic accounting analysis of Delmar's financial statements, interviews with other employees who'd been silenced, and digital forensics that recovered deleted communications. The scope was staggering. Evan Brandt wasn't just a serial harasser. He was part of a conspiracy to manipulate earnings reports. Isaac Morrill hadn't just enabled harassment, he'd orchestrated financial fraud. Chloe Delaney hadn't just dismissed complaints, she'd helped identify and silence employees who posed threats to the cover up. Your harassment complaint, Patricia said, triggered an investigation that exposed a criminal enterprise. 2 weeks later, Tara sat in a windowless conference room in the federal building in San Francisco, across from 3 FBI agents, a federal prosecutor, and enough recording equipment to document a war crimes tribunal agent. Sfera Martinez led the questioning, walking Tara through her timeline with the precision of someone who understood that every detail mattered. Ms. Nguyen, Agent Martinez, said, let's start with your documentation of the Eastern Corridor. Contract routing changes. Can you explain why you were tracking those decisions? Tara had told this story dozens of times to our 2 investigators, 2 journalists, but this felt different. The stakes were higher, the audience more serious, she explained. How she'd noticed the routing changes, how she'd questioned the risk assessment, how Martin had dismissed her concerns with corporate buzzwords about agility, and you documented these concerns. The prosecutor asked. Yes, Tara replied, pulling up her original spreadsheet on the laptop they'd provided. I created a timeline that cross-referenced the routing decisions with risk assessments, financial projections, and client communications. The prosecutor leaned forward. Ms. Nguyen, did you understand at the time that your documentation would be relevant to securities fraud? No, Tara said. I was just trying to protect myself from retaliation. I thought I was documenting harassment, not financial crimes, but your harassment was connected to your knowledge of the contract failure. Agent Martinez observed. Tara nodded. Slowly, that's what I understand now. When I questioned the routing decisions, Evan Brandt became hostile. When I documented the contract collapse, they labeled me as paranoid. When I reported the harassment, they tried to discredit my reliability. The prosecutor made notes. This pattern of silencing employees who posed financial risks appears to be systematic. Ms. Nguyen, are you aware of other employees who experienced similar treatment? Tara thought about the women who'd contacted her through her website, the former Delmar employees who'd shared stories of being pushed out after raising concerns about irregular accounting practices, project timelines that didn't match revenue, recognition schedules, client complaints that were buried rather than addressed. Yes, she said, I've heard from at least 6 other women who were retaliated against after questioning financial or operational decisions that later turned out to be problematic. The interview continued for 4 hours, covering everything from deleted Slack messages to manipulated calendar entries to the systematic way Delmar had used performance reviews to silence inconvenient voices. At the end, Agent Martinez asked Ms. Nguyen, how do you feel about testifying in federal court? Tara considered the question 18 months ago. She'd been a quiet data analyst who avoided conflict. Now, she was being asked to testify in a case that could send executives to prison. Terrified, she admitted, but also ready. I've learned that silence protects the wrong people. 6 months later, Tara sat in federal court watching Evan Brandt in an orange jumpsuit as the judge read the verdict: guilty on 12 counts of securities fraud conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Isaac Morrill had pled guilty the previous month in exchange for cooperation. Chloe Delaney had been sentenced to 18 months for her role in the cover-up. The prosecutor had built her case on Tara's documentation. The meticulous records that had started as self-protection had become the foundation for a federal conviction, but the real victory, Tara realized, wasn't Evan Brandt's 10-year sentence or the $50 million fine imposed on Delmar. The real victory was the message it sent to every other company that thought they could silence inconvenient truths with harassment and retaliation. After the verdict, Tara stood on the courthouse steps surrounded by Reporters and other Del Mar victims who'd found the courage to come forward the federal case had created a template for investigating corporate misconduct that went beyond individual harassment to examine the systematic ways companies use toxic culture to hide financial crimes. Ms. Nguyen. A reporter called out, "What would you say to other women facing similar situations?" Tara looked into the cameras, thinking about all the women who would see this broadcast, the women who were sitting at their desks right now wondering if they should document the inappropriate comment, the suspicious financial practice, the retaliation they were experiencing. Document everything. She said, "Your records might save more than just your career. They might save other people from becoming victims, and they might expose crimes that go far beyond what happened to you," because Tara Nguyen had learned that truth was like water. It always found a way to surface, and when it did, it could reshape entire landscapes. The harassment complaint that HR had dismissed as frivolous had become evidence in a federal criminal case. The quiet data analyst who'd been told she was being too sensitive had become the witness who helped send corrupt executives to prison. And somewhere in San Francisco there was another woman at another company documenting another pattern of misconduct, because Tara Nguyen had shown her that silence was never the answer, that documentation was power, that speaking up could change everything, even when it felt like no one was listening, especially when it felt like no one was listening, because the truth had a way of finding the right audience eventually, and sometimes that audience wore federal badges and had the power to put criminals behind bars where they belonged. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.